Start till the speaker gavels in.
All right, well, thank you all for being here. This is obviously second day of session, first opportunity to have a joint press conference at all. So welcome you all here and appreciate Robert coming up the steps to the higher floor and participating. But obviously this is budget session. That will dominate much of our focus, certainly in the early part of the session. As you all know, ever since we have been writing budgets, as the majority, we've been using our interims a lot more productively, I think, than maybe they've been used in the past, by building budgets and throughout the interim, utilizing our budget review subcommittees. I expect that budget will probably be filed within the next week to 2 weeks. I expect it to be built largely like we've built the last several budgets, which is to find places that we feel like that we can invest the people's money wisely, but also remain very fiscally responsible and balanced budget. As Chairman Petrie has continued to emphasize, that we build our budgets now based on our needs and not our wants, and I think you'll continue to see that in this budget. There are obviously some other things that we're going to be working on in the House. Predominantly, some of the things that have been talked about very publicly. The Safer Kentucky Act is a crime bill that has been largely championed by Jared Bauman from Jefferson County, who's done a great job of coordinating with the Louisville area legislators on that bill. But it impacts the entire state. But certainly the Louisville area legislators have been very involved in that. Access to health. I think you saw probably today that there was an op-ed done by Chairman Moser on a group that she is leading, bipartisan group on maternal health issues, and has brought together a very good group of bipartisan legislators, along with Chairman Samara Heverin of Families and Children Committee. And so those are the kind of the highlights that we are focusing on right this second.
I will add to that, the budget always starts in the House because the Constitution requires all revenue raising measures, up or down, to start in the House. So it makes sense that the House starts the budget. We are already in discussions, preliminary, about the things that have come out in the governor's office, what the House will do. We're going to be focusing on many of the same things, but we are going to be collaborating a lot with the House, because during the interim, we are asking many of the same questions of the administration and of our constituents, what we should and should not do, and what things are affecting their day-to-day lives. We will be looking a lot, again, at higher education, the reports that have come out, particularly with KCTCS, that were a product of Senate Joint Resolution 98, the Huron report, various things there, because workforce development in both chambers is key and critical to having a good economic type of atmosphere. We will also be doing some things and looking at energy. Energy is critical, and while we have become one of the utmost places to locate because of cheap energy costs, not just the announcements of the battery plants, but if you look around and see the presence of Nucor Steel, Logan Aluminum, others like that who want low energy costs, we are on a teetering point that we have to be very careful. I've written several op-eds and letters about energy, so we're going to be focused on that. And with the advent of more of the discussion in AI and what the demands will be in the future with potentially hybrids or battery exclusive types of electronic vehicles, I think it's critical for us to know to have a competitive edge to know what our energy demands and energy consumptions in the future will be. But I think the biggest takeaway out of this is we are here together, House and Senate, to talk about issues and be collaborative in the work we do. We will have regular meetings and discussions between our caucuses to kind of set what we think is the best path forward. And what I want people to understand about this process and many things that have been talked about in this last gubernatorial cycle, I use this comment quite often: don't believe me, don't believe them, look at the record. When you look at what we've done in a collaborative way since 2017, this is the group that has put together sound, fiscally responsible budgets that have met our pension obligations, that have put us in a position over the last 7 to 8 years to have better bond ratings, to have better reviews for site locators and everything else, because of the work we've done to make sure we have a good environment for creating jobs, which creates better families.
All right, if we want to get started with questions.
Speaker Osborne, you talked about wants versus needs. Can you name something in the governor's proposal that you believe is a need?
Well, we haven't actually seen the governor's proposal yet. We saw the highlights of it. So without knowing the details, it's very, very difficult to understand exactly what those things are.
What about based on his address, his public address?
Again, without seeing the actual document and knowing the details, what the pay-fors are, what the actual amounts are that are allocated, where they're being allocated from, it's just impossible to speculate.
What's the potential reason, and obviously you guys called this press conference ahead of time, but is there a specific reason why you guys aren't speaking after the governor's address tonight?
No. Actually, I think we're doing the KET thing afterwards, and we weren't able to do them both at the same time.
But as far as the media availability?
That's my point. We couldn't do both if we have to immediately go to KET.
All right, do we have another question?
President Stivers, you mentioned the need to strengthen, continue to look at energy policies and, maintain a, quote, competitive edge in electricity. Obviously, the legislature passed SB 4 last year, and even with the passage of SB 4, one of the largest utility in the state, LG&E and KU, retired some of their coal-fired fleet. Not all of what they requested, but some of it. What else could the legislature do on energy specifically in this session in your mind?
Well, I think you need to look more as an extension of Senate Bill 4 as to would there be viable uses, because many of these coal-fired generating plants, and I'm not advocating one way or another, it's just the realities that we have pressures of this issue of carbonization, decarbonization, but we also have pressures of making sure we don't run into situations that you saw in Texas a few years ago where there were blackouts. And people who understand the energy grid, and I know this is getting a little wonky, if it hadn't been for the Spurlock plant in Maysville, Kentucky, going to peak capacity and spending about $2 million on diesel fuel to go to peaking plants, the city of Louisville would have gone dark. A lot of people don't realize that, but go back and research it. But we need to have a strong energy policy because of all the development. Look at these coal plants that if they still have useful life and not the pressures of disincentives to coal or ESG to force them down based on stockholders or banks, that they could be taken over by different entities to make sure that you can put something out like a merchant power plant to supplement, to make sure that we have adequate generation. And I'm saying generation, and that's totally different than the grid factor, but we also need to make sure that when you do production, that it is not something that is away from the grid or uses viable agribusiness crop space. And if you want another example of how we are teetering, go to the southern portion of the state and ask what TVA has announced to not bring anything with more than 5 megawatts of new additional consumption to our grid, because we neither have the ability to put the grid out there, nor do we have the ability to generate more power. But looking at taking these assets and making sure they don't go offline. And if I'm not badly mistaken about the PSC opinion, that opinion allows them to transfer 2 of the coal-fired plants to natural gas, which is still a carbon-based fuel.
And, John Crockett, the leader of LG and KU, has pushed back on your argument, saying that there is an electricity reliability crisis, that, Winter Storm Elliott was an anomaly, and that some of these aging coal plants need to retire, that they're not economical.
I have never seen a system developed that only one valve would control the whole system. And I understand John. I've known John for years, and John has pressures from stockholders and bottom lines that he has to answer to, and individuals in his corporate structure of PPL. But again, don't look at me, don't look at him. Go out and research and see what other people are saying about the fact and reality that we don't have enough generation. And if you look, I believe, in their pleadings at the PSC, you will see that basically they were saying there's going to be a flatline growth of energy demand. If you believe that there's going to be a flatline growth of energy demand, I've got some good swampland to see in a lot of different places around here.
Do you consider coal to be a wholly reliable source? There were
No. I think you have to look at everything. And part of this, what we will try to do is talk about, nuclear, looking at continuing renewables. How much can they replace? What does oil and gas play in it? There's a lot of different things that go on.
Do you have any openness to pursue either some form of direct teacher raises like has been proposed by the governor and his opponent in the general election? And is there any openness to at least thinking about universal pre-K?
I think that you will, as we've done in the past several budgets, you're going to continue to see us make education a priority. I think there's always debate about what is enough and what is full funding. The fact of the matter is we've committed record funding the last 4 budgets. And that's both in real dollars and in terms of inflation adjusted dollars. I think that you're going to see similar investment that will be done. That I think you're going to see us stop short of mandating raises for particular classes of employees. I believe that those are decisions best made at the local level. And I do think that you will see us again contribute significant funding that local officials will have the ability to utilize that money. And I certainly believe and hope that they will use that money to give teacher raises.
Universal pre-K, is that dead on arrival, or is that something you all might look at?
I don't think there's much appetite in our chamber for it.
I think the appetite of the Senate is pretty much similar to that of the House. We all know that we have to be competitive with our sister states. We have to be competitive with the private sector, and there will be a need for the local level officials, school boards and superintendents, to have the tools to which to be competitive with.
Speaker Osborne, you mentioned the Safer Kentucky Act. I know you were on a panel with Louisville's mayor just a few weeks before the holidays. Outside of that, is there another proposal maybe he's talked to you about in general that you think could be good for Jefferson County?
We've had a number of very productive meetings with the mayor, both myself as well as the other Jefferson County area legislators. I'm not going to go into what the majority of those private conversations were. I think that the Safer Kentucky Act is a pretty good body of what there was kind of rapid agreement around. Certainly there's some things that are still in discussion, certainly some things that the governor, the mayor has asked for some flexibility on, has asked for some help on. We try to take all those things into consideration with what is good policy and what we can actually move forward in the legislative process. Conversation's ongoing too.
So it seems like there's some interest in legislation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Is that something you guys are committed to passing this session? And also, what is the problem with DEI programs in your all's opinion?
Go ahead.
We haven't had a lot of discussions between the chambers about what that would be, if there would be. Bills have been filed, but it's early in the session. A couple of things that we want to make sure of is that we do things that don't hurt us in one way or another, and we want to be measured in what we do. How that will eventually look is still up for debate.
Speaker Osborne, do you have any plans in your all's budget proposal to touch rainy day funds? And if so, what are some things that you would be willing to use that money for?
Well, I'm not going to go into specifics until we actually file a budget. I do believe that by the time we end this fiscal year, we will have a larger budget reserve than is necessary. As I've said previously, the one thing that we have excluded in the actual construction of our tax reduction formula that does not account as an appropriation is payment of pension debt and pension liability. So I think that understanding that is one of the things that we can actually do to invest in the financial stability of the Commonwealth and also stay within the bounds of that formula. I think it's reasonable to expect that we would utilize some portion of it for that.
Is it possible to, I guess, what is the appetite in your chamber for cost of living adjustments for state retirees?
I think that anything that we utilize one-time money for would be one-time expenses. I don't believe, and certainly there's an ongoing conversation about increases for retirees, but I don't think that you would see one-time monies used for that because that would be something that would create a recurring expense annually.
Is there any daylight between the two of you as far as that rainy day question, dipping into it at all?
Yeah, I'm going to say this, and I think the speaker and I agree upon this. You can come up with a lot of good theories and ideas, but what you have to do is not do silo budgeting. You have to do budgeting in the context of the whole. So anything's possible, anything may or may not happen, but you have to look at the context of the whole budget. And we are both in agreement in this. We want to continue to work to create the most competitive tax code, because if you want to know why people want to locate here, it is because a lot of the things we've done related to the tax code. And I give this as an example. Why did one of the richest men in the United States, not the sole and exclusive reason, but one reason, he moved off the West Coast to the East Coast? Because tax code. And the places that are growing the fastest are those that can be competitive in that area. So when you look at your budget and expenditures, you have to see what impact it has. So to try to do silo budgeting is totally inappropriate. It's going to have to be done in the context of the whole.
This is a question for you both. Is there anything you're wanting to hear tonight from the governor specifically?
I can't think of any specifics. We've had conversations with the governor about some of his requests, so I don't know of anything specific that I would expect to hear tonight.
Would you like to hear maybe?
Not that I can think of.
And are y'all budgeting around a tax cut in 2026? I guess it would be the drop from 4 to 3.5. Is that something that's included as a plan in that initial budget?
I think that's something we're going to have to look at. But again, what you do is you have to look at that expenditure level and what your recurring expenditures are, plus what is in a budget reserve trust fund, and take that in the context of the whole. If it's possible, we'd like to do it, but we don't know if it's possible. That's why we put triggers in. And a lot of people criticized us for, oh, you're creating a Kansas scenario. No, we're not. We had some of the best tax minds in and around the United States working on this to make sure we don't do a Kansas model. And it's shown we don't have a Kansas model. But if we can, I think we will.
And I think
for just a moment, you know,
back to Austin just a second. I think the one thing to your question, Austin, is I don't think that we make budget decisions based on something else. I think that our goal is to make the best, most physically sound budget that we can. We certainly did not budget to miss the tax cut this time. We certainly will not specifically budget to hit one next time or miss one next time. We're going to make the best financial decisions long-term for the Commonwealth that we can.
Conrad?
based off that, is there a new target date to get to 0% at this point?
No, we have always known that it was going to take in the neighborhood of 10 to 12 years, and I think that it will still likely fall in that range.
Okay. And then following up on education, absenteeism and test scores are issues not just in JCPS but across the state. Is there anything the legislature in either chamber is looking to do specifically to combat those issues?
We've got a couple individuals, Chairman Tipton in particular, is working on some learning loss initiatives that will try to help address the learning loss issues. The fact of the matter is we still have a lot of kids that are being, whose needs are not being met in Kentucky. And I think that you're going to continue to see that conversation dominate much of the session, whether that be along the lines of additional measures for to address learning loss, whether that be in measures to address some of the problems in JCPS, whether that be additional measures regarding school choice.
Will there be any consideration to go outside the SEEK formula or update the SEEK formula?
I don't believe that you will see that this year.
Speaker Osborne, when do you expect the House to introduce the Safer Kentucky Act, and do you think it'll be something that's passed this session?
I expect it to be introduced in the next few days. There's some continued tweaks that are being made, and yes, I do think it will be passed this session.
We've got time for a couple more questions and an online question, so we have. All right, let's
Do
move
y'all
to the.
think you'll pursue the exceptions to the abortion ban? Any update now that you guys have had caucus retreat?
Let me start with that. Been very clear, this is one of the toughest issues you have to deal with as a legislator. And we have continuing ongoing discussions within our caucus and have just started the discussions with the House about certain positions. So at this point in time, I can't give you any updates about what the position would be, but there is definitely discussion about exceptions and what may happen.
Do either of you have any thoughts on Senator Westerfield's bill, Senate Bill 34, that would provide more support for those who are pregnant or women with children? Have you reviewed the bill at all?
I've yet to see the bill, but in cases, and these are personal thoughts when we want to get to the abortion issue, that any individual who perpetrates an act of violence or force of will, or there is a rape or an incest, should be treated harshly and quickly. Same thing in the drug realm. You know, there are people who need rehabilitation and support. Those individuals who provide it, they're the profiteers, need to be treated harshly and swiftly. For those individuals adversely impacted, the trauma, everything around that, surrounding it, that instance, we need to give as much support to them as possible. And so mental health, access to preventative health care, you know, I'm not getting into that abortion issue, but into health care to make sure the mother has everything they need for health care is available. Those are the types of things I think you're going to hear discussion about.
Okay, I've got an online question.
Sure. This is from Jessica Blake with Inside Higher Ed. After receiving the CPE report about the feasibility of several different models for a new four-year college in Southeast Kentucky, how likely do you think it is that the state legislature will move forward and continue exploring the proposal of Senate Resolution 98? And what can we expect to see as a next step?
Why don't you take that one?
Oh, I'll take that since Senate Joint Resolution 98 was mine. It was an interesting topic or term used in the report talking about an education desert. And when you look at the poverty rates, and it would be helpful but beneficial, but one of the things is CPE, which the CPE was envisioned to do some 26 years ago, was to make recommendations. They think logistics now need to be fleshed out. The need is definitely there. The potential location is there, but the fiscal realities, the delivery mechanism, all that needs to be fleshed out. I think it's premature to say there would or would not be, but I think there'll be further discussion and maybe directive to CPE to do something or look at something to make further recommendations in future years. Even the individuals in the Eastern Kentucky area, which I think virtually everybody knows I come from, are in agreement with this. Let's be measured, let's look. I think maybe something more critical that we have had discussions about is what you do with KCTCS, because it is apparent from the Huron report and that report that came back from the CPE, there needs to be some major overhaul done to KCTCS.
Thank you all for coming,
Thank you all.
and stay tuned for future press availability.